We're going to look at quadratic equations and finding the vertex of those equations today. So in my first problem here, I'm going to start by labeling my A, my B, and my C. So my A is 1, my B is -10, and my C is 9. So I need that information in order to help me. So in order to find the vertex, I'm going to start by finding my axis of symmetry, because my vertex will always sit on my axis of symmetry. So x equals -b divided by 2a, which is going to be -10 divided by 2 times 1. So that means x is going to be 10 divided by 2, which equals 5. So my axis of symmetry is going to be at x equals 5, which is right here. So I'm going to draw a dashed line to represent that axis of symmetry. What that means is that my x value in that vertex, that ordered pair, is going to be 5. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that value, that 5, and I'm going to go back to my equation, and I'm going to substitute in 5 for x. So instead of x squared, I'm going to have 5 squared, and then 10 times x will be 10 times 5, plus 9. So let's see, y squared is 25. I'm going to take -50 plus 9, and that will give me -16. So my vertex will be the point 5, -16. The 5 is coming from my x value here, and the -16 is coming from the y value once I've plugged that back in. So let's look at a couple of examples of where we do this. So again, I'm going to start by labeling my A, B, and C. So A equals 1, B equals 2, and C equals 1. And I have to find my axis of symmetry to get started. So x equals -b divided by 2a, which will be -2 divided by 2 times 1, which gives me -2 over 2. And if I simplify that, that means my x value is -1. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to draw on my graph this axis of symmetry where x equals -1. I know that my vertex is going to lie somewhere on that line. Now I'm going to take this x equals -1 and I'm going to substitute it into my equation. So y equals -1 squared plus 2 times -1 plus 1. So let's simplify that. -1 squared is +1. 2 times -1 is going to be -2 and plus 1. So 1 minus 2 plus 1 gives me 0. That is going to be the y value in my ordered pair for the vertex. So my vertex is going to be -1, 0. And again, that -1 is coming from that x value, and the y is where we've substituted that x value back into the equation. So if I were to plot this point on my graph, if I go over here, I see -1, 0. That's going to be this point right here. That is the vertex of my graph. Let's continue on to another one. All right, we're going to start by labeling our A, B, and C values. Our A is 3. Our B is -6, and our C is 4. So let's use our equation to find our axis of symmetry. X equals -b divided by 2a. That means I have -6 divided by 2 times 3, which gives me 6 divided by 6. So my x equals 1. So I'm going to take this 1 value, this x value of 1, and I'm going to draw my axis of symmetry where that would be. So x equals 1 is this red dashed line here on the graph. And somewhere on that dashed line, my vertex is going to lie. So I'm going to take this 1 and I'm going to plug it back into my original equation for x. So y equals 3 times 1 squared minus 6 times 1 plus 4. So let's simplify that. 1 squared is 1, so that's going to be 3 minus 6 plus 4. So y is going to equal 1. So that means in my ordered pair, my x value is going to be 1 and my y value is going to be 1. So my ordered pair for my vertex is going to be 1, 1. So let's plot that point on the line right here. This is where the vertex of my graph will be. All right, one more example. Let's start by labeling our A, B, and C. So A equals 3. Now my B and my C are tricky because they don't exist, which means I have to label them as 0. Since there's no x value, there's no constant, we know our B and C are 0. So I go back to my formula for finding the axis of symmetry, which is negative b divided by 2a. I substitute my values in. That means I would have negative 0. Well, you can't really have negative 0, so we'll just write 0 divided by 2 times 3, which is 0 over 6. And anything that has 0 divided by a number, 0 divided by anything is going to be 0. So my x value is going to be 0. My axis of symmetry is going to be where x equals 0, which happens to be my y-axis. So I draw my axis of symmetry here. Then I take that 0 and I say, okay, I got to plug this back into my equation. So y equals 3 times 0 squared, which is going to give me 0. So my vertex is going to have an x value of 0 and a y value of 0. So the point 0, 0 is my vertex, and I can go over here and plot that on the graph. And there's my vertex.